Buenos días, buenas noches, queridos amigos de Chile y del mundo. Good evening, good night, good day a todos los amigos. Hoy día tenemos un programa súper especial de Casa 13. Por primera vez me voy a atrever a hacer algo que no había hecho nunca y que es entrevistar a una persona en inglés. Así que espero que esto nos pueda traer numerosos invitados nuevos y cositas distintas que hacer. Así que les pido perdón a los que solo hablan español. Este episodio va a ser en inglés, pero posteriormente va a quedar en YouTube traducido, con subtítulos o traducido. Así que si lo quieren mirar ahí, espectacular, ni un problema. So I'm gonna turn to English now. I was telling the people that though I'm a journalist, I haven't done an interview in English yet. So this is my first time, and it's a new thing for a channel, for a YouTube channel, and I'm very glad to welcome our new friend, Julian the Philosopher. How are you, man?
Hey, how are you doing today? Appreciate that. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming. For me, it's a real pleasure. I've been attending to your lectures. I plan on attending more, and they have been very informative. It's a very specific topic that not many people can talk about because you have to know philosophy and occultism. You were telling me you aren't a practitioner, you aren't directly a magician, but you like the study of the history of esotericism and everything, right? Tell us, please, where are you? Where do you come from? You're Canadian, but what city are you coming from? What can you tell you about that? Because we live in Chile, it's very far. I have some friends that have gone to work with there because, well, there's more opportunities. But I really don't know Canada. Where are you from?
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity. Right now, I'm living in Canada, Ontario, Canada,
Okay.
and basically, we, I guess, we're in a situation now where Western civilization is kind of at a tipping point where we have to decide kind of the foundations of how we want to lay the groundwork for the future. And so usually there's two kind of systems that the modern world uses, and they would be people that look to the past for the answers and people that look to the future for their
Okay.
answers.
But before starting, before starting with that, I'd like to ask you a little bit more about your background. Can you tell us about where did you study? What are your degrees? That kind of thing, and
Okay,
especially
so
where did you
yeah.
find this connection that is so passionate for you?
Okay, so with my personal connection with philosophy, it really started around 2010 when I went to university at University of Western Ontario, where I obtained a degree in philosophy. And basically, I started realizing um, that Western sciences, medicine, engineering, all of these types of fields are all related by one origin point, and I felt that philosophy was that origin point. And so it led me to even further study the origins of Western civilization, like how did we come to these belief systems? And basically, over a long period of time, over the last 16 years, I've spent almost every waking moment of my life analyzing how how philosophy functions. Things like epistemology, like the theory of knowledge, like how do we know what we know, are very important to things like the scientific method, understanding how science works, understanding how physics works. At the very core level, you have this philosophical, ethical foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And in history, sometimes we refer to it as the Greek miracle.
Yeah, right.
And that kind of refers to when the Greeks kind of started creating the world's first secular knowledge. So that would be knowledge that is separated from God, and
Yeah.
it would be purely scientific. and they would seek for more material explanations rather than purely spiritual explanations for things like natural phenomena or the outcome of a battle, for example.
Yeah, sure.
So you can kind of see how, yeah, sorry, what were you going to
No,
say?
no, I mean that even though there's a materialistic view, you still have metaphysics that are still ingrained to the philosophy, right?
Yes, the ancient philosophers before the time of Socrates would be much more concerned about looking up at the sky and more concerned about cosmology, metaphysics, the stars, for example. They would be much more concerned with those things. It was more after the time of Socrates where Socrates actually brought down philosophy from the stars down to the people in the marketplace and made it a lot more accessible after his time period.
Yeah, yeah. It's what you refer as secular, and it's a bit more practical, right? Ethics, more morality, and you were talking about the tipping point on Western civilization, and I want to ask you, can you define Western civilization? Because we as Chileans, we are not. We're kind of in the middle, right? Because we are mixed races. I mean, we have Native Americans and also European influence. So we are kind of on the verge. We especially in Chile, we don't have like a strong identification, like people who want to give themselves airs of importance think that of themselves as Europeans, but you just go to Europe and they remember and they make you remember that you are Latin American, that it's a very different thing. How would you describe Western civilization, and how do you think Latin America is how do you think our place is in that? Maybe I'm taking you out of your area, but maybe you can tell me what you or your fellow mates over there think of Latin America in those terms.
Okay, I can answer the question first about Latin America. I think that Western civilization and Latin America actually does fit into that equation. So I would say that Western civilization started thousands of years ago, and it doesn't have anything to do with America or Canada
Yeah, sure.
or the traditional European powers that you would think about, because we're talking about, 2,500 years ago, essentially, right? And basically, Western civilization at its founding was founded by Athens and Jerusalem and Egypt, in my opinion. A lot of people normally academically will say it's Athens and Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
And Athens provided the secular scientific knowledge, the philosophical background, and
Right.
Jerusalem provided the mythos,
Right.
the mythology that provided the spiritual underpinnings upon which the Western project was situated
Sure.
to differentiate ourselves from the other groups, basically. And Egypt also provided Egypt was like the bridge between the Bronze Age, the Old World, and the new classical and world of antiquity, where the Greeks and the Romans, for example, and that's where the Latins start coming into it, because the Latins basically the original Latins or the Romans
Yeah, sure.
were very much enthralled with Greek culture,
Mm-hmm.
and they adopted a lot of Greek culture, and the Latin culture spread all the way to America, all over the entire world. So I'd say to a large degree the Romans were the inheritors of the Greek tradition to a
Mm-hmm.
large degree, and they carried these beliefs with them into the future. And I think that Latin America is very much so a part of the Western tradition, in the sense that it is part of that ancient tradition,
Yeah, sure.
right? Whereas the modern world would be more situated around an American centric view. Even in Canada, all of our news and all of our media and information
Yeah.
usually flows from an American direction. So
Mm-hmm.
we're kind of downstream from Americans culturally, politically, economically,
Yeah,
right?
sure. The propaganda machine, Hollywood, all that stuff. And so then I would like to ask you, You spoke about Egypt and onward sometime, but when I think about Egypt, I think about the basis of Hebraic, Judaic, ¿cómo se dice? Hebraic mysticism, Greco-Egyptian mysticism. So I wanted to ask you, when does the philosophy and the occult become entangled, or if it was like from the start something I mean that both things were one, and in that case, when did they go apart? What does it mean for philosophy and occultism to be two separate things? How do we mix them? Can you speak a little bit about that, Ephraim?
Okay, so I would say that this is what we were talking about earlier, that Pythagoras became so important in my work after studying so long. I had initially thought that Plato was the key to everything because Alfred North Whitehead said that Plato in all Western philosophy is merely footnotes to Plato, meaning that that if philosophy is the origin point for Western civilization coalescing, that Plato is the point within that point, like the eye of the storm, in which that all investigations begin with him, and that we move outward from that position. So I find that Plato said that in his school at the academy, that if you wanted to study with him in the academy, then you had to study geometry. And I believe that he got those beliefs and he fashioned his school, the Academy at Athens, after the original school that Pythagoras founded called the semicircle. And Pythagoras was the original mathematician, geometer, essentially, who said that his universal theory of everything was that all is math.
Yeah.
Right? And he also talked about the music of the spheres and a couple other things we can get into as well.
Sure. I'm a musician myself, and I give music lessons. And I was just speaking with a student about the monochord. I don't know if that's in English. Like when he starts splitting in half the strings and getting out the 12-note system. And how it starts relating to the music of the spheres and planes of existence and states of mind, right? So it's very interesting how genius you must be, and how I mean to learn all these disciplines and establish all these systems in base of their interdependence. Even though nowadays we don't think too much of music in relation to geometry, or in relation to cosmology. So you think it's Pythagoras. That would be your pivot point, right?
I think that if you're going to learn about Plato, you're going to want to learn about who his teachers were. And although he didn't have any personal contact with Pythagoras, I think that Pythagoras was one of the first people who coincidentally traveled from where he was born, the island of Samos in Greece. He traveled to Egypt, and he studied in the schools there. And then when war broke out and basically the Persians conquered Egypt, he was taken as a prisoner because they took a lot of the literate priests from Egypt prisoner and brought them to Babylon, where he was imprisoned. But he also learned a lot of, like, when you're in jail, basically you do a lot of reading, essentially, right? Sure. And so he basically learned about mathematics, and he learned about philosophy, and he learned about spirituality, and he basically maximized his abilities while he was there, and eventually was released. And then he came back to Greece, and he was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. So he's essentially been initiated into three different mystery schools before he creates his own. So he's literally a master of three different mystery traditions, including the one of the most important ideas that he brought from the East with him, which is this concept of the reincarnation of the soul, which was not familiar at the time to the Greeks, because the Greeks had a version of the afterlife where you went to Hades and you crossed the river Styx, but you did so as like a shadow form of yourself, not a fully integrated
Yeah, you forget everything.
metaphysical soul.
Crossing the sticks, you
Yeah.
forget everything.
Yeah, see, so their version of the afterlife is more of like a shadowed version of yourself, whereas Pythagoras believed in almost an Egyptian sense, because the Egyptians also believed in an afterlife and reincarnation, obviously because of their crazy practices of like the embalming and the sarcophagus
Mummification, right?
and and they were more obsessed with the afterlife. Yeah.
So I'm still amazed when hearing about Pythagoras, because he almost feels superhuman. He feels like a semi-god, you know, because it has all these like mystical flag points. I think it's the term. I mean, 3 times initiated, just as Hermes Trismegistus. And he goes to all of these places of power, of ancient mysteries. And it was in I guess it was the time when Egypt and Greece were like part of the same territories, or right, when so. But I didn't know he went to Babylon. So he was initiated in the Egyptian mysteries that sometimes are equated as the origins of Judaic Kabbalah, Hebraic Kabbalah. And afterwards Babylon, that we know that they are the first astrologers, the Chaldeans, all those things, right? And later the Eleusinian mysteries. That's quite a trip, quite a background. So we start then with Pythagoras. Can you tell us what did Pythagoras meant? Or maybe you just answered, but what comes after Pythagoras then, in terms of occultism, metaphysics? Who would be the well, you mentioned Plato. Plato is the next one, because the ideas plain, the erotic. There's a lot of like Latin or Greek terms that I know in Spanish, and I may be pronouncing it differently than you, so bear with me. But erotic plane, how do you call that? The plane of ideas?
The realm of forms, perhaps.
The realms of forms. Okay. Like when speaking about the cave myth, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
the allegory of the cave. Yeah.
The allegory of the cave, right? So let's talk about that. What means the allegory of the cave for, or Plato in general, to the next step of occult philosophy?
So Plato's allegory of the cave is basically the idea that humanity exists in a state where, in the myth, essentially, you're trapped underground and you're shackled by chains to the wall, and all you can see in front of you is the shadows on the wall, and there's puppet masters basically manipulating shapes in the fire that's there behind you, that's creating the shadow. So there's a fire in the cave. You're watching the shadows on the wall, believing that the shadows are reality.
Yeah, sure. If you haven't gone outside,
which is very much like, and remember, you've never seen the outside.
Yeah, sure.
So you've never seen the real sun.
Yeah.
So you believe that the fire that is being stoked in the cave is the real sun without ever having seen the real sun. And not only this, but you're very satisfied with the life that you have, because you have nothing to compare it to. So basically what happens is Plato compares himself to the philosopher who tries to get into the cave and drag forcefully the people out of their ignorance, out of the cave of ignorance, and bring them out. But the people will actively fight back against you. And I think this was metaphorical for his experience trying to enlighten people and the pushback that he received
Yeah,
in his time period.
sure, sure. So the
So
philosophy.
basically, the sun wasn't the real sun. It wasn't the real sun. It was the point that he was making essentially, and he makes it in a lot of different metaphorical ways.
Hmm.
But he also makes this point about actors versus real people, real heroes versus people pretending to be heroes, right? So he believed that actors were in Greece, actors were getting so much acclaim pretending to be Greek heroes. But the actual Greek heroes of the time who were actually alive were not getting the same level of love and affection and respect he felt that the actors were getting. So he was like believing, and it almost is also it's also about his cosmology as well, because Plato was very focused on, and so was Pythagoras supposedly, on a heliocentric universe where the
Hmm.
sun was the center of the
Wow,
universe, not the earth.
very early.
So yeah, so and so they described it in different ways essentially, but they had, back in the day, they had a much more comprehensive understanding of the movement of the stars, although Plato referred to it as the music of the spheres, believing that when the planets moved, that their movement created a music that we couldn't hear. But Plato would have referred to this basically as that music is just math that we can hear.
Yeah, sure. And it is.
And
Pythagoras demonstrated that.
yeah, very much so. So, and then, okay, so basically you have this idea that his universal theory of math being everything, you can actually see it being demonstrated in the occult in things called sacred geometry,
Yeah,
right?
sure. The
So
golden
sacred
ratio,
geometry,
the number five, everything.
yeah,
Okay.
and there's another example too. His wife, Pythagoras had a wife
Hmm.
also named Theano, and she was also a philosopher, and she took over his school after he died at that apocryphal beanfield supposedly, that she basically carried on the school after him. And there was two splits in Pythagoras's school. There was the mathematikoi and the akousimatikoi. So the akousimatikoi were the listeners,
Yeah.
and the mathematikoi were the people that were more into like the actual mathematical equations, like they were the math people. The
Ah, the listeners, you mean
what are they called?
like intuition wise, like receptors.
Yeah, they took Pythagoras' stuff and they used it. They were like the spiritual practitioners. Think
Yeah,
of them
sure.
as the people who applied his beliefs spiritually, whereas the others were, his wife actually joined the mathematikoi. So they continued his mathematical work while the other group basically continued his beliefs. For example, vegetarianism, certain beliefs about reincarnation, certain practices. So in Hermeticism as well, we lost contact with Hermeticism after the temples of Egypt and the whole priestly class was destroyed in a whole bunch of different ways. But we have the philosophical Hermetica and the practical Hermetica. The philosophical Hermetica would be like the belief systems that are involved, the philosophy that's involved. The practical Hermetica would be like the practice that the priestly class actually does every day in their life. So think of it like the actual daily life of Pythagoras. These
Hmm.
people were emulating the daily life of him, his style of clothing, for example. He dressed like a hippie. They were considered the hippies of the time period. They had long hair. They wore robes that were and they had a very like serene attitude that other people found very disconcerting, because they believed they had all the answers because they were the only people who could do math. People thought that math was magic back then.
Yeah,
So
sure.
it's questionable whether math is magic, or is math something that we discovered. We didn't create it, we discovered it.
Yeah,
You know
sure,
what I
sure,
mean?
sure.
And it's a system.
I'm on
Yeah.
the latter option because I think that well, mathematics is still magical to me, and especially when talking about Hermetica, we were speaking about Hermes Trismegistus, about Thoth, about Mercury, right? So we're speaking about the the invention or the gift to humanity of the numbers and letters, hieroglyphics, and afterwards, in my case, the tarot cards. That I think of them as the gift of the same Hermes, because in origin it's one and the same: numbers, letters, hieroglyphics, and all these cryptic symbols that come from that. Um, so the acousticoi was the name of the followers.
Yeah, I want to say it properly, so I'm just gonna I'm just gonna look it up. Acousmaticoi, I think.
Acousmaticoi. Okay, okay, yeah. It's but it comes from the same root, probably acoustic. Listening to
Acousmaticoi. I was right the first time. I just want to make sure I didn't get it wrong because it's a complicated one.
Yeah, sure.
Um,
So
so we had the listeners and then we had the practitioners, right? So then the mathematical people continued on with his wife moving forward, whereas the other schools eventually dissolved and got absorbed into other schools like Platonism, for example, because
Right.
Plato was big in Greece. But you have to remember also that Pythagoras was not an Athenian. So he was
From
much more
Samos.
like a Southern Italian or a Greek. So he actually was not part of the Athenian school of thought that usually we think of associated
So he
with
was
like
an
philosophy. We always
outsider.
think Athens, right?
An outsider. Right. And well, let me go back to Hermetica, because if we say Hermetica, we think about Greece probably. We think about the Emerald Table. We think about the Kybalion. Is that how you pronounce it? Kybalion.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but you refer to Hermetica speaking about Egypt. So, I immediately think about the 3 times initiated Hermes, Thoth, Hermes, Mercury. So, please tell us, what is Hermeticism? What is Hermetica? What does it mean that it begins in Egypt? Egypt goes on to Greek and later to the Latin Empire, the Roman Empire. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So Hermeticism is a cultural synthesis of Greek and Egyptian culture together.
Okay.
So before the Greeks were, and even before the time of Pythagoras, and this would have been around 500 to 600 BC. So this is long before Plato. Basically, before before he was considered Hermes Trismegistus, the god of writing and messengers, was Thoth, the Egyptian god Thoth with the bird face, if you remember.
The Ahuti, ibis shaped face. Yeah, he's a personal friend of
was
mine.
worshipped. Yeah, I've become quite acquainted with this character in these studies, and he was essentially the one who was the Greek equivalent of Hermes, the messenger god in the Greek version. So there's one messenger god of writing in Egyptian and one messenger god of writing in Greece.
Sure.
And essentially what happened was, it's really interesting. So remember at the beginning of our story, Pythagoras as a kid, as a university student, ends up in Egypt studying with the Egyptian priests before the Persians attack. Fast forward 200 years later, Alexander the Great, being tutored by Aristotle, shows up in Egypt and starts conquering Egypt and frees Egypt from Persian occupation, allowing the priests, the Egyptian priests, to practice their old religion again. But now they have the assistance of the Greeks there as well. So what this new synthesis of Alexandria under the control of the Macedonians, right?
Alexander and all of that.
Is now
is Alexander's time or before that?
No, this is when Alexander the Great shows up with his Macedonian empire.
Okay.
And he brings with him Aristotle.
Yeah, sure.
Because Aristotle, by his father Philip, hired Aristotle to be his tutor.
Yeah, sure.
Which was one of the best choices he could have ever made, basically, obviously. Right? Which you see, and interestingly enough, Aristotle is actually one of the primary sources that we have for Pythagoras. which is really interesting because Aristotle actually wasn't a big fan of Plato and Pythagoras. He actually didn't like them very much because they were much more spiritual. Than Aristotle is much more scientific, mathematical minded, and
Uh-huh.
he's not into the spiritual stuff. So Aristotle rejected all of Plato's metaphysics, but he accepted the math and the more practical aspects of it, right? So Aristotle, carrying with him the words of Pythagoras and Plato, brings with him back. It's almost like a return journey, essentially, right? For the Greeks to return to Egypt because they had already been there before, years earlier. And basically, Alexander the Great, adds the Macedonian and Greek culture to, and brings Hermes with him to meet Thoth, and together they make a synthesis of Hermes Trismegistus. So Hermes Trismegistus is basically Thoth, the Egyptian messenger god, and the Greek god as well. And in Latin, he wasn't called Hermes; he was called Mercury.
Sure.
So the Romans would have referred to him as Mercury or Mercurius sometimes.
Sure. Yeah, I love that. When speaking about Hermes, we all imagine like this young lad in the nude with winged feet, winged helmet. But when studying the manifestations or sculptures on Mercury, you find a lot of different ones. Like there's this wizard guy with the pointy head. There's also like monoliths on the crossroads, right? That is, it's just the thing, like a standing stone that it's Mercury. It's very interesting, like a phallus, a stone phallus. Trismegistus or Trismegistus. How do you say it?
Meaning thrice greatest, three
Thrice
times
yes.
greatest.
And three times in
Yeah.
three times. But I want to ask you about the pronunciation. Trismegistus or Tris?
See, that's interesting. I don't know if I want to answer that because I don't know if I'm
Don't worry.
answering it right either. So let's just say
I'm just asking you how you Anglo speakers call it. Don't worry. I'm not testing you on Greek. But it's just because
I'm curious.
Here we say Hermes Trismegisto. It's very different.
Yeah, it's Trismegistus.
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 Sure.
Yeah.
So we have then we have the Pythagorean school, then we have the Platonic school. Now we're on to Aristotelic school in Alexandria. That's another weird one because it's so surprising to see all these women philosophers or scientific women, when we ourselves have like professional women like 100 years ago, and not before that. So it's very nice to go back and realize that even in the roots of the Western society, women seem to have more rights than we had just recently. That's very surprising, but like heartwarming to me. Remembering that we haven't always been this bad, this patriarchal, this how do you say machismo? I think you say machismo too, right?
Yeah.
So okay, we have.
We can't forget that. Yeah, Pythagoras also. Don't forget. So Pythagoras believed in reincarnation, and it was central to his belief system because he believed in the immortality of the soul. And therefore he believed that it was possible to reincarnate as a dog, or as a human being, as a woman as well. So meaning that he could come back as a woman.
Yeah, sure.
And he believed that. So he actually taught women and men at his school, and it was one of the first, even way before Plato. We're talking, like I said, this is 500 to 600 BC. Okay. Plato's like 345. So this is 200 years before Plato. Pythagoras had women, and not only that, the person who took over after he died was his wife.
Yeah, sure.
Who they followed after that. So not only was the school run by women, but there were women in it.
What was her name again, please? The wife's?
Theana.
Theana.
Theana of Croton.
Theano
Theano of Croton.
of Croton. Okay. Um, um, Maybe I'm going off the rails, but I have heard about the Emerald Table. That's original, but it's related to the Hermetica, the Hermetic corpus. But I've heard that it's originally from an Arab origin. Have you heard about that? Can you tell us about that? Because we have talked about Judaism, Greeks, Romans, but we haven't talked about Muslims or Arabs. What's the Arab connection in terms of Hermetica and Western occultism?
Sure, it's a great question. So the Emerald Tablets of Thoth were basically I've actually read them, and it's interesting you bring that up because that was actually the first one of the first occult literature that I ever read. And it really got me interested in this
Yeah.
stuff because it was when you read it, you hear all about that there's secret compartments underneath the Sphinx and that there's a spaceship underneath there and that you can access it, and there's a whole bunch of technology under there and spiritual things in there. So there's like basically a whole bunch of secret rooms. And supposedly when Napoleon took over Egypt, he disappeared inside the Sphinx for quite some time and didn't reappear until after. So we're not exactly sure what Napoleon was doing inside the Sphinx, but there is kind of a long historical running trend of world leaders needing to go to Egypt in order to get some type of sanctification, in order to get,
Initiation.
it's almost like traveling to the Vatican to be blessed by the Pope.
Yeah,
You need
sure.
to travel to Egypt to be consecrated by the gods of the old world in order to become important. So you'll see people like Alexander the Great, Caesar, and Napoleon all showing up in Egypt in order to gain this sacred eternal knowledge that that country only has, right? And you can even see from the ancient world, the Romans, the Egypt was so old that to the Roman world, the ancient Roman world, they were being tourists and showing up in Egypt to see the pyramids the same way that we are today. So in a way, Egypt has been so much so a part of Western civilization that it has become synonymous with not only the occult, but with, it's on the American dollar, for example, the pyramids. Like, it has become so synonymous with almost every aspect of our lives. For example, Pythagoras also worshipped a symbol called the tractatus,
Yeah.
which is basically a triangle shape.
The
And it
tetractys.
refers to the monad, and the monad would be like the top triangle in the triangle shape, essentially.
Yeah. Like the
And they basically worshipped it.
very Kabbalah like emanations and all, right? And
Yes, and so I would say that they got that the Kabbalah link is actually also to do with Plotinus, who is the founder of Neoplatonism. And that goes another couple hundred years into the future, but we're not there yet. Well, maybe we'll get time for that later.
okay. So so where do we go now? There's the Gnostic side, right? Or do we have something in between?
Okay, so Christianity doesn't take part until after this, but what happens after the Alexandrian period is basically that's the Roman Empire's ascendancy, right? So Rome basically does Greece a great service by exporting its cultural hegemony to the entire world.
Yeah, sure.
So the books, the learning, the science, the philosophy, and the spirituality of Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and Pythagoras was spread to the entire Roman Latin-speaking world. And these are so fundamental to the construction of Western civilization that you could argue that the Greeks and the Romans and the Latin world had more to do with the construction of Western civilization than any of the English-speaking nations today that you would normally think take credit for it, because none of the original people who created things like democracy or science or the original spiritual literature that we're referring to right now or the occult, none of these people were English speakers and they weren't from that part of the world. So it's kind of a modern view that we have that Western civilization belongs to certain countries and not to the original people that actually constructed these ideas.
Yeah, it's just who took the mantle of the empire, like Charlemagne. It's that right?
Charlemagne, yeah.
Charlemagne, okay.
Yeah.
Carlo Magno. And of course the Roman Empire. Uh, yeah. The English wasn't even invented, but we have all the Teutonic, Celts, barbarian tribes. Um, okay, so when does what's the next step in Roman Empire? Do we have new schools or just rehashing the old ones?
Okay, so the Roman Empire was a multi-pluralistic empire. So it contained within it Greeks, Germanic speakers. It contained Egypt at the time
Mm-hmm.
because Egypt was made part of the Roman Empire after Alexander the Great annexed the country during the Macedonian period. So Egypt became very much a part of the Roman Empire. And we usually don't think of it that way. But without Egypt exporting so much grain to the Roman Empire, there would have been no way for Rome to sustain itself. So Egypt was an integral part of the Roman Empire. It was the knowledge base, it was their connection to the past, so it was like a bridge to the past, often referred to like as a thread of prophecy. Occasionally people like to refer to it like that, right? Because once those threads of prophecy are severed, people forget where they came from. So Egypt is kind of like a way for us in Western civilization to kind of still have connected roots to the past.
Yeah.
So in this sense, what happens in the future is we have characters like Seneca or Cicero,
Yeah.
and these characters would basically extol a philosophy called Stoicism.
Oh yeah, right.
And Stoicism is,
It's
yeah,
also been
Stoicism was
it,
created by Zeno. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I wanted to say that that's another one that's been trending, right? Stoicism, and nowadays it's a very weird manosphere thing, but we're gonna speak about the original one, as it happened with the cave meme. Nowadays, there's a lot of memes on the cave allegory, and it's really wonderful to see new media summarizing so greatly for new readers specifically, right? So now we can have it as a meme, not only as an old academic term. So well, we were with Seneca, Cicero, and Stoicism. Tell us about that. Is it just
Okay.
Bitcoin and waking up at 5 o'clock?
So interestingly enough, you could see the Stoics kind of as like Pythagoreans without the math. So they were into a very austere monk-like existence.
Uh huh.
And they also, this is another point that people often miss in a lot of their assessments of Western civilization and philosophy, is that they focus too heavily on Athens. So they miss Pythagoras. And you know who else they miss? They miss the Spartans. Because the Spartans produced a lot of thinkers who actually produced this stoic way of thinking, right? You know, sleep on a hard bed, don't
Yeah.
consume too much food, luxury is bad for you.
Yeah.
These kind of beliefs that kind of create a monk-like stoic austere existence where these people would basically put their physical health and their and things like adhering to nature, the principles of nature, as high level virtues upon which you could construct an empire, and it would create a lot of good men and women who had strong values, and that's what the empire needed. Because unlike some of the other belief systems which were exclusive, uh, Stoicism is very inclusive and it's very positive. Anyone can practice
Yeah.
Stoic values, and Stoicism is a very positive belief system because Stoics believe that all of the things you need to have a good life are here with us in this world. You don't need to appeal to spirituality or anything else. That all the things that we need to have a good life are here,
And
and that we just need to put those things in order, put our lives in order, put our minds in order to access those virtuous states of being, essentially.
right. So does Stoicism negate afterlife, or it just doesn't matter?
Stoicism. So Cicero wrote a book called On Living and Dying Well. And Cicero, in this book, he details basically the Stoic life, and he details basically that this is the crazy part. I don't usually tell people this, but essentially, philosophy, especially the kind that you and I are talking about, not the dry academic library kind,
Yeah.
but like the ancient, esoteric, hard to understand kind, would be that all philosophy is actually interested in living a good life and preparing yourself for death. So think of philosophy like the Egyptians preparing the pharaoh for the afterlife.
Yeah.
You are the pharaoh, and the philosophers are preparing you for the afterlife, for a good life, so that you can have a good afterlife.
Okay. So there's an afterlife, but that's not the specific point. I'm glad you spoke about the Spartans because we, at least me, think of Spartans as like barbaric muscle men, like strategic minds, but very wild in terms of let's throw our sons to the wolves and all of that. But it really clicks when you speak of them as Stoics. It makes much more sense. So, and what comes after the Stoics then? Who should we go to?
You could say that Stoicism never really fell apart, and I'd say the reason why Stoicism has become so popular is because of, like I said, the Roman Empire was not a single group of people. The Roman Empire was all sorts of different people, right?
Yeah,
There's
sure.
got Italians, you have Greeks, Germans, you have Egyptians. You have to get all these people to work together essentially and to form a cohesive unit, right?
Yeah.
And to have peace essentially in the empire. So Stoicism works very well for that. And if you think about us today as a global economy with multiple different countries, we're kind of operating like a Roman Empire that needs peaceful integration. So Stoicism kind of helps us work together and function better. The problem is that Stoicism is not the highest level of philosophy, and that people always miss that. The highest level of philosophy is the golden soul. And the golden soul is the philosopher king. And interestingly enough, there's a quote about Pythagoras where supposedly Pythagoras is at a sporting event and he shows everyone that he has a golden thigh. His thigh, like his leg is
Yeah.
literally, his upper leg is literally all gold, like metallic shiny gold.
But
And everyone looks at him like, "Whoa, that's crazy." And in the ancient world, that meant that you were becoming a god. And basically, and it was like an alchemic thing, like turning the soul to god, the soul to gold, right?
yeah.
And so Pythagoras was treated like a divine person. Not only that, but he was also witnessed at two places at once. So he starts performing like miracles essentially in different ways, and you can kind of see the progression of Pythagoras becoming a mythical character
Yeah, sure.
over time. And like,
A
yeah, essentially,
divine messianic figure. Cool.
yeah.
I,
So yeah. What are you gonna say?
I was thinking about when I was studying the Arthurian mythos. There's a lot of talk on thighs, and I think it can be translated as penis, phallus, when thigh is like euphemism. So maybe we're talking about the same phallus becoming golden in terms like Freudian terms, as the will, like the personal will becoming golden, and it all comes together alchemically, all the stuff. Very interesting. I was also
I was thinking actually James Bond. You know James Bond
yeah,
and
sure.
Goldmember and Goldfinger when they paint the person gold, or Austin Powers. Like that's what I was thinking of. I was like, okay, so that's where they got it from.
Probably. And also I was thinking about Stoicism as universal ethics call for globalization, but I was thinking it's very similar to the Protestant ethos on working yourself to death and becoming better for that, right? It's very in that, and it really speaks about the English imperialism taking over or starting this kind of globalization we have nowadays. But I interrupted you. Please go on. We were talking about men thighs.
Yeah, we were talking about the golden phi of Pythagoras.
And the term you used, the
So I was
golden soul, I haven't heard that before. Where does that come from specifically?
okay. So in Plato's Republic, he talks about something called the myth of the metals. And the myth of the metals is essentially this belief that he had that in his utopia that he was going to construct,
Mm-hmm.
that he believed that he wanted to tell people that they had three different kinds of souls. The
Ah,
gold soul is like the philosopher king, the silver soul is the stoic guardian of the city, and the bronze soul is like the plebeian worker
yeah,
essentially.
sure, sure.
And so it was a lie. It was a lie essentially that he knew, and he called it the noble lie. But he did it on purpose because he wanted certain people to really be committed to their professions. And a lot of different people in the old days, they were very concerned, oh, we don't have enough blacksmiths, we don't have enough soldiers, we don't have enough this or that. So they would sort of kind of force certain groups of people to take professions and then continue those professions for generations,
Kind of
because it
a,
was important for the society to have certain professionals essentially, and it became kind of a law. And so he tried to make it into a law that was necessary. But the interesting part is that notice that Plato is talking about three different kinds of souls,
mm-hmm.
which is a very non-Greek thing to do. It's much more Pythagorean. It's much more the immortal soul, the
Yeah, metaphysics.
qualities of the immortal soul, kind of, that you start
Yeah,
thinking about it. You say, hey, that doesn't sound very Greek of Plato to talk like that.
but I think it's very power structure, a power structure like thing to do, to co-opt a spiritual term and turn it into a chaste system. But because that's what he's
Yeah,
doing, right?
it's very ironic. It's ironic that his perfect society was based on a lie. It's almost like he was messing with us and trying to tell us something essentially. Because in Greece, utopia is a play on words for a place that doesn't exist. Because
Yeah,
the
sure, sure, sure.
dystopia exists, but the utopia doesn't exist on Earth. Because
Yeah,
it's a lot easier for you and me to think about, sit here and consider with each other what a dystopia looks like. Pretty easy to think about. We can just look at the world we live in.
mm.
But in terms of a utopia, of a perfect world,
Yeah, that's a
you and I
difficult
will
thing.
have a lot of trouble trying to figure out what
Yeah,
that's going to be.
it's like the I don't remember who said it, but it's a lot easier to think of the end of the world than the end of capitalism, right? It's kind of the same thing.
Yep, sure.
Hey Julian, we've been talking for an hour now, and I have to start closing up the conversation. So first of all, I wanna invite you to come on later next month or something, so we can keep on talking. I think there's a lot of stuff we could we just graced upon that I would like to go deeper. I wanted to ask you what conclusion can you make, or how can we round up this oversight of the ancient philosophy, and then we go from there. What would you like to say? Last words about these themes.
Well, I'd like to say first, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this stuff, because I feel that it's very important, because this is all of our inheritances. This is our intellectual inheritance. Pythagoras wasn't just doing math for the Greeks. He wasn't just doing math for certain groups of people. This is the kind of stuff that all humanity deserves to learn about, because it's a shared human trajectory that we're
Yeah.
all on. It's a shared human project. And I like to think of us all as contributing in some way, shape, or form to that human project
Yeah.
for the betterment of all mankind. And in terms of a conclusion, I would say that a lot of times at the beginning, I said there was something called the Greek miracle, which is essentially when they somehow, it seems like they just stumbled onto science
Yeah.
and philosophy without, and there wasn't really a good explanation as to why. And I would say that that never really happened, and that spirituality and science and occultism have always been joined together,
Yeah.
and that they
Sure.
never really separated. And then the separation was actually kind of an illusion brought on through, the secularization of the sciences, the church changing the way that we learned about history.
Uh huh. The
And also,
Enlightenment.
if you look at just the deep core, yeah, exactly, the enlightenment and the deep core of human understanding, really requires you to have a materialist and a non-materialist understanding, because once you get deeper into it, you realize the material world is not all that there is.
Yeah, sure.
And that the people that suggest that are actually correct, and that you don't need to look, into a complex spiritual realm to find it. You can look to science, and you can look to mathematics, and like the mathematics of the spheres, the music of the universe. These concepts are still relevant today.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that we can look to them and use them as our tools to decipher the future henceforth.
That's a great conclusion. We have to look pastwards to go forward. I want you to tell me, where can we find you? What are your handles? I mean, because you are running a Discord server where you're giving out lectures. How can people find you? How can people get in contact with you?
Wait, so I have a Medium up, which contains my writings. There's about 19 different articles right now on a variety of topics, and most of them tie-ins to philosophy, cyberpunk, metaphysics, or artificial intelligence. And you're gonna find me on Medium at Julian Soloninka, and on YouTube, I think the links will be in the description.
Yeah.
And if you want to get in contact for the Discord, I would say message me on through the YouTube, or through Medium, or through Facebook at Julian Soloninka, and I'll make sure to get you in, because I don't believe this is like an exclusive secret society. I believe that the cyberpunk ethic is that information wants to be free, and I want to facilitate that for everyone.
That's great. When you told me about cyberpunk, that was something we hadn't discussed yet, and I was really amazed. But we didn't have time to talk today. I wanted to do just like a basic stuff, because there's a lot of people that don't know anything of this. But maybe in the future we can talk about cyberpunk, and well, surely you will tell us more on your lectures. And I'm really glad we had this time. I want to thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and I hope we can get together again, man. How did you feel?
Yeah, for sure. I'll obviously invite you on my platform, or anytime you want to take part in anything. I'd love to have another conversation.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that.
Thank you very much. I would be glad to help in any way I can. So that's how we end this episode. And se me olvidó cómo lo termino en español. I remembered. Este fue el último capítulo de Casa 13, Tarot, Magia y otras hierbas. Y nos vemos la próxima semana con más contenido esotérico y con más amigos entretenidos. Nos vemos la próxima semana. Bye bye.
I saw the whole thing coming, I envisioned in the past, about to jump into the bag. I saw the whole thing coming, I envisioned in the past, about to jump into the bag.